Turbochargers and superchargers, two different methods of force induction. Here's the benefits and differences of turbochargers and superchargers. First, turbochargers, also known as turbos. Turbos have two different sides, a turbine housing and a compressor housing. The turbine housing has a turbine wheel that is powered by waste gases from the exhaust. The turbine and the compressor wheel are connected by a shaft, and as the turbine wheel spins because of the exhaust gases, the compressor wheel also spins as a result. The compressor wheel sucks in air and compresses it. As air gets compressed, it heats up, and this isn't good since the oxygen which is required for combustion becomes less dense, which leads to less power, and in a worst case scenario, knocking. This is where an intercooler comes in. An intercooler takes heat off of the compressed air and transfers it into an ice tank if it's an air-to-water intercooler, or into the atmosphere if it's an air-to-air intercooler. After the compressed air from the turbo passes through the intercooler, it then goes into the intake. The turbocharger may take some time to spool up and create boost, known as turbo lag, although the amount of turbo lag depends on the size of the turbo. This is what a turbo sounds like as it spools up. Meanwhile, superchargers have the same principle of compressing air, but have a different method of doing it. In a supercharger, instead of there being two turbines, there are two rotors that compress the air. These two rotors are powered by a belt driven by the crankshaft, which is why they are sometimes called belt-driven superchargers. Just like in a turbo, the compressed air from a supercharger also heats up, which means that it has to pass through an intercooler before going into the intake. This is what a supercharger sounds like. Now, onto the benefits. Both turbos and superchargers increase an engine's volumetric efficiency, which is an engine's ability to suck in air. Naturally aspirated engines usually have a volumetric efficiency of around 80%. A forced induction engine has a volumetric efficiency of above 100%, which means that more air and fuel can be burnt, which leads to more power and also fuel economy. Another benefit of forced induction is that at high altitudes, these engines do not suffer a big loss in power since they can still compress the thinner air. Naturally aspirated engines suffer from a lot of power loss at higher altitudes since they cannot compress the air. A benefit of superchargers over turbochargers is that they do not have any turbo lag, being that they are powered by the crankshaft. Another benefit of superchargers is that it is a very effective way of increasing power for a relatively cheap price. Lastly, since the supercharger is often directly on top of the intake manifold, this results in faster throttle response. However, superchargers actually take some power off of the engine in order to drive the supercharger pulley since they are powered by the crankshaft. This results in them not creating as much power as turbochargers and simply not being as efficient. On the other hand, turbos create a lot more power and are generally much more efficient than superchargers. One of the biggest reasons why turbo engines are being more common in city cars is because they also increase fuel economy by around 20 to 40% while still having plenty of power. In fact, an expected 43% of new cars in 2019 are turbocharged. Lastly, turbos are quieter than superchargers in terms of the actual components and the exhaust noise. Turbochargers sort of muffle out the exhaust sound, which can be both a good thing and bad thing for consumers. Here's an example between an E92 M3 and F80 M5, both having V8s, but the M5 having twin turbos. Unfortunately though, turbos, especially big ones, suffer from turbo lag since the compressor has to spool up first. Other than that, turbos are usually cooled by oil straight from the engine, which may require an additional oil cooler to be installed since turbos get very hot. Lastly, turbo engines may suffer from compressor surge, which is when the turbo suddenly builds boost during partial throttle and messes up the car's balance and stability, which may be dangerous in a corner. Either way though, it ultimately depends on personal preference. Personally, I prefer turbos. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you guys found this video helpful, and if it was, please leave a like and subscribe to keep up to date with new content. If you have any video suggestions, please tell me in the comment section below.